Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's virtual event. What an incredible opportunity to be hosting Yaa Gyasi in our virtual space this afternoon. For those of you who haven't attended one of our virtual events yet, my name is Anastasia, and I am the events manager for Bank Square Books and Savoy Bookshop and Café. I just have a few quick pieces of housekeeping to get out of the way before we dive into today's event. So Crowdcast, the platform we're presently on, has some really great features that you can utilize during the event today. I see some of you have already taken advantage of the chat feature to the side of the stream, and that's awesome. Please chat in, tell us where you're viewing from, chat with each other. That's wonderful. You can also submit questions throughout the event. You can either put them in the chat, which I will be monitoring, and I can move them into the chat. And then there is also an ask a question button right at the bottom of the screen below us here. You can submit your questions there as well. You can also view other audience questions there and upvote them so that the most voted questions that you're the most interested in make it to the top of the queue. So the other thing that is awesome is that this will be recorded in this space. So if you come in late or you have to step away for a moment, you'll be able to go back and rewatch in this little platform. And then finally, the most important feature is probably that shiny green button right below the stream that says buy the book. If you have not already purchased a copy of Transcendent Kingdom and would like to, or you'd like to get one for a friend, family member, you can do so by hitting that green button, which will take you back to our website. Books ordered through that link will come with a signed book plate from Yaa. So thank you so much for signing those book plates for us. And for those of you who haven't seen the book, here it is. It's beautiful. And it's going to be fabulous. So all of that out of the way, now we can get on to the good stuff. It is my great pleasure today to introduce you to Yaa Gyasi, the best-selling author of Transcendent Kingdom and Homegoing. And Bookpage has called Transcendent Kingdom unforgettable. Transcendent Kingdom is an expansive scope that ranges into fresh, relevant territories, much like the title, which suggests a better world beyond the life we inhabit. And introducing our moderator today is up next. And we are really delighted to have Shani Collins here with us today. And she's a professor at Connecticut College, one of our local event partners. And Shani is actually going to tell you a little bit more about Yaa, but I will tell you a little bit more about her. So, as I said, Shani is a professor of dance at Connecticut College, and she first stepped foot on the campus as a performer in their onstage performance series at Palmer Auditorium, which those of you who are local will probably know. And that is where historically the One Book One region, which Yaa will remember as a One Book One region alum, is normally held. This year, that event is tomorrow and is virtual. So tune into that as well. So Shani joined college as a professor in 2009, and now she shares her work with this community as she continues to experience teaching, learning, building history and culture through dance. She's earned numerous accolades for her work, and in addition to teaching, she continues to present her work across the globe. So with that, I am going to let Shani introduce Yaa to you, and I'm going to go off screen until the end of the event. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to this conversation. Thanks, guys.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Anastasia. Welcome, everyone. I see you chatting. Everybody is so excited. We're so honored to have you, Yaa, here with us today. So as most of you know, Yaa was born in Ghana and raised in Huntsville, Alabama. Her debut novel, Homegoing, which if you haven't read, you must read. It's won so many accolades, including the National Book Critics Circle John Leonard Award for Best First Book, the PEN Hemingway Award for a First Book of Fiction, the National Book Foundation's 5 Under 35 honors for 2016, and the American Book Award. So she holds a BA in English from Stanford University and an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop, where she held a Dean's Graduate Research Fellowship, and she currently resides in Brooklyn. So we want to welcome you, Yaa, so much. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for writing Transcendent Kingdom, and we're honored to kind of spend time with you talking about it today.
Thank you. Thank you, Shani, for introducing. Thank you for moderating. And thanks also to Bank Square Books for hosting. This is wonderful. I'm glad that even though we are in this situation right now, that we can still share virtual space with one another. So thank you all for spending your Sunday afternoon with me. I really appreciate it. I think we're just going to start by reading a little. So I'll read just from the very beginning of Transcendent Kingdom. And then we can get into Shani's questions. Whenever I think of my mother, I picture a queen-sized bed with her lying in it, a practiced stillness filling the room. For months on end, she colonized that bed like a virus. The first time when I was a child, and then again when I was a graduate student. The first time, I was sent to Ghana to wait her out. While there, I was walking through Kejitia Market with my aunt when she grabbed my arm and pointed. Look, a crazy person, she said in Twi. Do you see a crazy person? I was mortified. My aunt was speaking so loudly, and the man, tall, with dust caked into his dreadlocks, was within earshot. I see, I answered in a low hiss. The man continued past us, mumbling to himself as he waved his hands about in gestures that only he could understand. My aunt nodded, satisfied, and we kept walking past the hordes of people gathered in that agoraphobia-inducing market until we reached the stall where we would spend the rest of the morning attempting to sell knockoff handbags. In my 3 months there, we sold only 4 bags. Even now, I don't completely understand why my aunt singled the man out to me. Maybe she thought there were no crazy people in America, that I had never seen one before. Or maybe she was thinking about my mother, about the real reason I was stuck in Ghana that summer, sweating in a stall with an aunt I hardly knew while my mother healed at home in Alabama. I was 11, and I could see that my mother wasn't sick, not in the ways that I was used to. I didn't understand what my mother needed healing from. I didn't understand, but I did. And my embarrassment at my aunt's loud gesture had as much to do with my understanding as it did with the man who had passed us by. My aunt was saying that is what crazy looks like. But instead, what I heard was my mother's name. What I saw was my mother's face, still as lake water, the pastor's hand resting gently on his forehead, on her forehead, his prayer, a light hum that made the room buzz. I'm not sure I know what crazy looks like, but even today, when I hear the word, I picture a split screen, the dreadlocked man in Kejitia on one side, my mother lying in bed on the other. I think about how no one at all reacted to that man in the market, not in fear or disgust, nothing, save my aunt, who wanted me to look. He was, it seemed to me, at perfect peace, even as he gesticulated wildly, even as he mumbled. But my mother, in her bed, infinitely still, was wild inside. I'll stop there.
Thank you for that. Thank you. How I experienced this book, so much grief, right? So much pain, as well as humor. And just hearing you read this first chapter, I think the audience, you really get a sense of how Yaa is describing. It's very sensational in terms of the whole experience. So I wanted to get in a little bit into the many experiments that that Gifty, who's the main character, does, starting kind of from her first experiment, the naked egg, which we may be familiar with, that we do in grade school up until like very sophisticated experiments in the field of science. And I wondered, especially you as a English major, just the journey and the process of your research of all these scientific aspects that is brought into the book. Would you speak a little bit more on your research behind that?
Sure. So for those who don't know, Gifty is a doctorate, or she's getting her doctorate in neuroscience at Stanford University, where she studies specifically something called the neural pathways of reward-seeking behavior, which sounds intimidating, but really, in layperson terms, she's studying addiction and depression. And so the way that I found my way to this research is because my own dear friend from childhood is a neuroscientist. And when I started kind of thinking about this novel, well, really, I wasn't thinking about this novel. I had finished a first draft of Homegoing, and the book was coming out. And my friend was nearing the end of her thesis experiment. And she had always explained her work to me as being about addiction and depression. That was really all that I knew about it. She had a major paper that she was about to publish. And I remember sitting down to read this paper, opening it up, and not being able to follow even 2 sentences of it. Like I didn't understand at all what was going on. And so my curiosity kind of took over, and I asked her if I could go visit her in her lab, which she very kindly said yes. And so I shadowed her around her lab. And the day that I went, she did this experiment, or this surgery that I detail in the early pages of the book. And I found it so fascinating. She works with mice, and Gifty in this novel works with mice. But Gifty's main experiment is one where she puts these mice in a behavioral testing chamber, and then she trains them to press a lever in order to get Ensure. And so the mice do this, they get excited, they love the Ensure. And then after a while, the conditions change. And sometimes when they press the lever, they get Ensure, but other times they get a mild foot shock instead. So it's a way of measuring addiction and risk. So the scientist is able to see which mice are so addicted to the Ensure that they keep pressing the lever, even though that there's risk involved. And so this is Gifty's experiment. It's something that she's interested in. We learn later because her own brother suffered from addiction when she was a child. But I would say that the research process was really fascinating, completely different from anything that I'm usually doing with my days. And that was nice. It was nice to kind of switch gears and focus on something that I knew so little about, and try to learn about it in a way that I could articulate it through fiction. And I'm very proud to say that at the end of finishing this book, I could go back and read my friend's paper and understand it. So that felt like a personal achievement.
Wow, that's really great. Just like totally jumping into new territory. Wow. Okay. For the audience too, the book is very episodic in a way, similar to Homegoing in terms of the sense of time. There's a lot of memories. Gifty is also, she journals a lot. She has all these journals from childhood that she goes back. I'm going to try not to tell you everything about the book, but so I'm just curious about like the sense of time and how you're able to unfold that, like how it comes to you. Do you switch the beginning and the end, or where things happen, and how you're able to, the choices that you're making around the order of the different chapters?
Sure. So for those of you who are familiar with Homegoing, it's a book that covers about 250 years of history in Ghana and the United States. It's written in these discrete chapters that follows a different character in the lineage down from 1750 to present day. And even though it had this kind of sprawling lens, a sprawling structure, it was actually pretty contained. It moved linearly. So we start at the beginning and we end at the end. And I almost had this kind of mathematical approach to how I was going to write these chapters because of the timeline. I knew that I wanted to cover about 20-year increments with each chapter. And so there was something really nice about having just this built-in structure that allowed me to wrap my head around how to think about time, even though I was covering so much time. Transcendent Kingdom was completely different. It does not move linearly. So it goes back and forth from the present and the past really quite often and hopefully quite seamlessly. And when I started it, I was really kind of intimidated by the fact that I didn't have this tight structure to work with. I didn't know I honestly, I Googled how do you structure a novel? Like I just didn't know where to begin with this new idea that I had. And it took me a while to understand that because Gifty is this woman whose work and whose present day life, it really, really relies on or reflects upon her past. She's a character who is often going to be thinking back to that past. And so it felt really natural to not have this be a linear novel. It took a while to kind of get the balance right. I think there were drafts where it was flashing back way too much and it was a little jarring to read. And then there were drafts where I made it much more linear and it took some of the kind of propulsive energy out. So I did have to toy with how to go about this. But ultimately, what I decided was that anytime that Gifty is kind of exploring some aspect of her research that makes her think back to her brother, then we would use that as an entry point to flash back to that time. And hopefully both timelines, the past timeline and the present timeline that intersect and interact are clear and compelling. But it's very much a story about the way that we take our past with us, that we carry our past with us.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. With that said, so the people in Gifty's life are the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Gifty's dad, Chin Chin, who's named after like a delicious snack in Ghana that you could pick up in the market or on the street.
Yeah.
And then there's Gifty's mom, right? And that relationship being so just exquisite in the way that Gifty wants to show up for her mother, but she's very much feeling all of like the shame around Nana, her brother, and that kind of situation. So Gifty trying to want to be this hero for her mother, but at the same time, she's navigating her own circumstances in life. I'm just curious, and I'm sure like our audience, and thinking about how you're developing these characters. Some of the book is located in Huntsville, Alabama. Some of it is in out West Coast where Gifty is studying at Stanford. And so these are the main locations, and some in Ghana. Curious about your development of characters and how you're thinking about them as they evolve. If your relationship changes with these characters over time. And I guess in the back of my mind, I'm curious about if they are connected to real people, which they felt very much so for me in my experience. I could think of my uncle or think of even my own relationship with my mom, thinking about, I also have 2 young kids, thinking about the relationship between brother and sister, one boy, one girl, and how that manifests. So just curious about the characters in the story.
Yeah, well, they aren't based on real people, but it's always really amazing to hear when readers say that they felt like real people to them, or that they made them think of real people, because then I feel like my job is has been done well. But the way that I think about character I don't know, it's really kind of an intuitive thing. And I'm not a big planner. I'm not like a very big pre-planner when I'm starting a novel. So I don't do outlines or character sketches. I really am just kind of like fumbling my way through the beginning to try to see what the novel is, what it wants to be. And because of that, I am also the kind of writer who throws away a lot of pages at the beginning until I like find the voice, the style, the character that feels right for the story. So I would say that once I finally realized that this was very much about Gifty, and that I wanted to write it from the first person perspective, so I could kind of see and feel and hear and remember all of the things that she herself was seeing and hearing and feeling and remembering. It felt like I suddenly had access to this pathway that had opened up for me. So this book is very, very character driven. It's a book wherein we are getting to see this woman who had an incredibly grief-filled past, grief-filled childhood, reconcile that grief and kind of think about and process that grief. And to do so, she has to talk about these major absences in her life, these absences that feel themselves like a kind of presence. So we spend a little time learning about her father, the Chin Chin Man, as you said, named after what Ghanaians call Achimo, but Nigerians call Chin Chin. And then he's a man who comes to America with Gifty's family, and then finds that the American dream does not hold true for him, and decides to go back to Ghana. So that's a very real physical absence. And then there's her brother, who becomes addicted to opioids in high school. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say this, he passes away pretty early on in the novel. And so then there's that absence. And he's probably, I think, the most central character to Gifty's life. He's the person who was a constant, who provided love. And then there's her mother, who is a very kind of guarded and difficult woman, even before Nana's passing. But after Nana's passing, she becomes completely bereft. She falls into this depression, and she becomes kind of no longer able to take care of Gifty the way that Gifty wants or needs to be cared for. And so that's another kind of absence. So I was thinking about how to write a character who is in some respects kind of alone in this world, kind of trying to figure out what to make of all of these losses that she has endured. And one way to think about these losses, and one way to think about character, I think, is to realize that each of these people held a particular role in her life. And then from there, I can try to kind of tease out what that role meant, so that you see what that loss felt like to Gifty.
Mm-hmm. That was absolutely translated through the words. I mean, I literally had moments in reading this book where I had to stop and cry. I mean, I think especially at this time, you know, during the pandemic, during kind of this uprise for Black liberation, it's kind of like even more potent, this concern and the action that needs to be taken around mental illness, and the racism that Gifty and her family experienced, coming from Ghana, living in Alabama. I'm originally from Greensboro, North Carolina, so I grew up in the South. My parents are from Mississippi and South Carolina, so some of the characters I could just totally identify with, just in terms of, you know, the derogatory comments and names, you know, and how they were treated. And this gaze that Gifty keeps talking about, right? And also it being located in the church. So this was another aspect in terms of Gifty's like spiritual journey, right? And so in I don't want to give anything away, but I think it's really interesting, this comparison that you bring up around science and religion. And so I'm just thinking about all of that. I'm thinking more particularly in this moment of racial justice. Do you have these ideas as you're writing them? It sounds like that you're really open, but coming through in your work is illuminating absolutely like the racism that exists. How are you grappling with that as you're writing? How much does that influence what comes out on the page? And is there an intention or a starting point with that? Or is that something that unfolds as the characters unfold?
I think the latter. I think it's something that unfolds as the character unfolds. There's this really excellent essay that I read. I think it came out back in June by Dr. Lauren Michelle Jackson. It was in Vulture, but she was writing something along the lines of what is an anti-racist reading list for? And in it, she talks about how all of these books have kind of shot up to the top of the New York Times bestseller list, these books on anti-racism, and also novels by Black writers. And she was saying that it was interesting to her to see The Bluest Eye, a book that she teaches and loves, reappear on the New York Times bestseller list. And one thing that she says in the article is that the way that The Bluest Eye engages with racism isn't like to teach you anything. It isn't to tell you how to live your life, what changes to make, what to do, but instead, racism is what she calls in the environment. It's just, it's like weather. It's what the characters are experiencing. It's what they're going through. If you're going to write about this character, you can't leave out this part of it, the weather. And I feel like that really spoke to how I think about racism, or writing about race, is that there's no way for me to write a character like Gifty, who is growing up in Alabama, in Huntsville, and in more specifically in the predominantly white section of Huntsville, as a Black woman, as the sole Black woman at her church and at school and on the soccer team, all of these places. There's no way to write a character like that without writing the things that she would be experiencing from a like microaggressive level. And as we all know, microaggressions are not micro. Once they start to accumulate, they enact a force on you. And so we see the ways that Gifty and her family have to engage with these kind of daily chipping away, subtle, sometimes not so subtle, moments of racism. And those inform character, those inform identity, those inform the choices that these people are making, that these characters are making. For me, this book is partly an exploration of the idea of internalized racism, the idea of Black respectability politics. Gifty is a character who is trying so hard to, as she puts it, be good. I think in great part because she feels like this is the way that she will finally kind of earn her spot in the majority, earn acceptance, earn just a place that keeps her free from these kinds of comments and this way of looking at her. But as we see, it doesn't save her. It doesn't save her at all. It doesn't save her brother. It doesn't save her father. It doesn't save her mother. And she has to learn that lesson. There's a moment in the book where she's at her church, this place that has brought her a lot of comfort, that has taken her through some difficult times, that is deeply important to her mother. Faith is incredibly important to her. So she's at the church and she overhears these two women make racist and disparaging comments about her brother and about his suffering. And what she says is that it was a spiritual wound to hear this comment, a wound that was so deep and so hidden that it has taken her years to find and address. And I think that that really fully encapsulates Gifty's character for me, is that she's a character who has been wounded by racism, and has internalized it and felt for years that there was something she could do to kind of break out, and is realizing slowly that it's not on her, that there's nothing she has done wrong, nothing that her family has done wrong, and it's a lesson I think that takes her many years to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we so appreciate you for writing this book, because spiritual wounds are not talked about a lot. Neither is, there's more and more work done on making more visible Black folks in the sciences, as well as women in the sciences. So you hit on that. Gifty also explores kind of her own sexuality, her body, just being inside of her head, like you're saying, in terms of what is internalized, the stigma behind mental health, and just the journey of her brother. Just really appreciate you tweezing this out for us, and allowing us to relate, to connect. I think it helps it just in everyday life, especially now. So we appreciate that. What else? In just a few minutes, we'll open up questions to our audience. So audience, if you have any questions, you can start putting them in the ask the question box for Yaa. Just curious about you, what I heard from you about reading your friend's paper by the end of writing this book, or you understanding terminology. I'm curious about if there's any other surprises that kind of came out of this work, or anything that you learned about in the process of writing this book.
Well, I was doing a lot of research into addiction while writing this book. Like so many of you watching, probably, I was reading a lot about the opioid epidemic, the ongoing opioid epidemic that has not gone anywhere, even though the pandemic is looming large right now. But I found so much of the reporting around the opioid epidemic to be really fascinating and nuanced and humanizing and sensitive. So there were these there was a great documentary I watched that followed the firefighters in this one town that were learning how to be first responders to people who were going through overdoses, because they were having such a high number of overdose cases. I read this great visual essay on the New York Times called "How Opioids Hijack the Brain." And so I was learning like a lot of different, I think I was getting a picture of the opioid epidemic that I had not gotten before, thanks to all of this research. One thing that sticks out that I learned, one fact that sticks out that I learned, is that the average opioid use disorder sufferer will relapse 4 or 5 times over the course of 8 years in order to get a single year of sobriety, which really just was a figure that kind of staggered me. And it made me realize how much relapse is a part of recovery, and we don't often talk about it that way. Like, I think oftentimes you think if the person relapsed, then it means it was a failure, that the recovery didn't take, or that rehab didn't help. But in fact, if you are dealing with a drug that literally rewires your brain, it's challenging to get it back to the place where you are no longer reliant on that drug. And so relapse is a part of recovery, and we have to start thinking about recovery in terms of healthcare. So those were kind of some of the major points that I thought about while writing this book.
Did you have a favorite part of this book, or a favorite character?
Oh, well, I love Gifty. That's an obvious answer, I guess, but she's probably my favorite character. She's interesting because even though I wrote this book and wrote this character, I do feel like her personality as a reticent person impacted me as well. I found her difficult to get to know, which was particularly challenging because I was writing in the first person, but also I had come off of this book, Homegoing, that was written in an omniscient third person where I could kind of know everything about everyone, write anything I wanted about anyone. And now I was so reliant on this one character, and she was a difficult character to see. And I found her to be very, I felt like she was very real in that way. Like she didn't always say the right thing. She's an unreliable narrator in some ways. But her unreliability comes from the fact that she doesn't really know herself, or she like won't let herself know herself. I find her very, very, very moving in that way. So she was a favorite. I also really loved writing Anne, who's kind of a secondary character, but she's a person that Gifty meets in college who tries to kind of draw Gifty out of her shell a little. And as I said, Gifty's a difficult person, so she's reluctant to be drawn in that way. But I liked having this character who was willing to challenge Gifty, because I felt like there were few people in her life who were trying to kind of pull her out of herself.
And lastly, before we open it up, you speak of transcendence a couple of times in the book. Nana's transcendence when he passes, the transcendence of the mice. What were you thinking in terms of the title and its meaning? Would you share with us?
Yeah, so the title comes from this moment early on in the book where Gifty is recalling a teacher who said something along the lines of humans are the only animals who believe that they have transcended their kingdom. And she's talking about, kingdom, phylum, class, order, like that kind of kingdom. She's talking about humans as animals who don't really believe that they are animals. And Gifty really takes this to heart. And I think she is a character who is attempting to ask transcendent questions, who is deeply interested in like what it means to be alive. Why are we here? What can we do for one another? All of these big questions that are oftentimes unanswerable. But the search for the answers to these questions is part of what makes us that transcendent animal. So that's kind of what I was thinking about with the title.
Okay, so I see some questions coming in. John McKnight, hello, John. John is our Dean of Equity and Inclusion at Connecticut College. So he says, I can't wait to read the book, wondering your thoughts on the trend of African Americans relocating to Ghana.
Yeah, this is kind of a time-worn trend. I'm thinking of, Du Bois going back to Ghana. I think that Ghana just kind of extended an open invitation to any African Americans who wanted to go back, either to visit. Last year was the year of return, so there was a big push to have African Americans come to kind of get a sense of the roots that they could have had. I think that it's a beautiful thing to do if it's the thing that you feel moved to do. And I'm glad to see Ghana kind of reckoning with its past, reckoning with the fact that it had this role in the slave trade, and understanding that this is one of the reasons why our lines have been broken in this way. So if there are people who feel the need to repair that line in some fashion by returning to Ghana, I think it's a wonderful choice. And I'm obviously biased, but I think that Ghana is a wonderful place full of really generous and kind people. They always say that if you're going to visit Africa for the first time, go to Ghana or South Africa. And I think that part of the reason for that is that Ghanaians are a wonderful people. So if that is what people are feeling the need to do, I fully support and understand.
I completely second that. After visiting, actually, I took students back in 2019. We were there for 3 weeks. We brought in the new year this year in Ghana
Oh,
to
wow.
study dance. Yeah, so some of the locations of the market in Cancun, the national
Mm-hmm.
park, just so resided, it was so present in the
Yeah.
book. Um,
Yeah.
so Stephanie Cruz, hello. She says that she grew up in Huntsville too. She graduated from Grimson's rival,
Okay.
Huntsville High. Yep, in
Yeah.
2009. Um, she's very familiar with how the church permeates every aspect of the life in the South.
Mm.
I'm curious about how you see faith, spirituality influencing a sense of place.
Mm. Yeah, I spend a lot of time, I think, thinking about place, thinking about the fact that there are so many aspects of our identities and our cultures that are informed by just where we grew up and the way that where the people where we grow up kind of take on the cultural identities. So for me, Huntsville was probably Alabama was the place that felt like most informed by religion, where there wasn't really a huge separation of church and state. You know, I write about it for Gifty in this book, but it was true for me as well that we had no sex ed. What happened was that a person from the church came and talked to us, and we wrote these essays about why we should wait. Which, you know, when I got to college, I told somebody that, and they were just like, what? Like, it's so different from their experience. This person had grown up in California. So I think that it was the place where religion felt so close to every other aspect of daily life. And my family grew up, or I grew up Pentecostal. And so it didn't feel foreign to me in that sense because I practiced religion. But I imagine that if you lived in a place like Huntsville as an atheist or not as a Christian, that it would be difficult to kind of understand the way that Christianity was kind of influencing every aspect of life there. But I think this book was a chance to think about and process what faith might mean to somebody who later in life kind of turns toward just different ways of thinking through the world, different ways of asking questions. But Gifty is a character who still very much, I think, retains that foundational identity as a person of faith. She just kind of goes in a different direction with it. And I think it was useful to me also as a person who had gone through similar circumstances in the church as Gifty, as a way of processing that time in my life. Mm.
Okay, so Sherry Cherwin is just asking about the documentary that you mentioned. If you could mention the name of it, or if you remember the name of it.
Oh, Sherry, I'm so sorry. I don't remember the name of it. I'll have to look it up, but maybe
Okay.
if I find it, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Okay, so hi, Jack. He's asking, does the process of letting the characters present themselves creates more organic characters?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, every writer is different, and I'm sure that there are writers who would disagree with me, writers who really love a character sketch. I remember seeing, what is his name? I think his name is Amor Towles. He wrote a book called A Gentleman in Moscow. I remember attending a talk that he gave where he said that he spends years just on an outline and a character sketch. And so the writing for him actually goes really quickly. Like he writes in like a couple months, but the planning takes so long that by the time he gets to the writing, he knows everything about the characters, everything about the plot. And so obviously there are very, very different ways to write a novel, but for me, there's something really pleasurable about just kind of figuring things out on the fly, like being surprised by choices that characters are making, following their thoughts as they go, ending up in a completely different place than maybe I thought I was going to end up. That's part of the fun of writing for me. I've tried writing like with character sketches and outlines, and I often just feel kind of stuck within it. So I think that I end up with a kind of more organic sense of the characters by doing it this way. But every writer is different, and I don't think there's a one right way to do it.
Thank you. Okay, David Dorfman, who works in the Department of Dance at Connecticut College, he's saying, this is so incredible. Thank you both so much. Enlightening. For Yaa, did you feel as an author / person, you changed in a discernible way by the end of writing this book?
In a discernible way. I don't know if I changed in a discernible way. It's hard to know. I strongly believe that every book like changes me, but I don't know if I could ever like articulate how those changes come about, what they look like, if they are discernible. I do feel a sense of myself as being like a stronger writer with every book, just a more comfortable writer, more comfortable in my talents, more aware of what my strengths are. So that's, I suppose, a discernible change. But I think there's also something kind of ineffable that is happening when I write, that I can't see right away what it is that has changed in me. But with the next book, suddenly I become a little more aware of it. So maybe ask me that question again after I've written another book, and I'll have a different answer. For Homegoing, I think that it was a book that I started writing when I was so young. And I started writing when I had all of these kind of just questions, and also just, I don't know, like curiosities and anxieties about identity, when I was still feeling very much like I was straddling the line between what it meant to be Ghanaian, what it meant to be Black, what it meant to be Southern, what it meant to be all of these identities that I was carrying with me. And Homegoing was the book that allowed me to process those things. And I can say now, years later, that I think that the thing that book changed in me was that it just kind of made me more at ease in my skin, made me more accepting of the fact that I was able to carry all of these identities within myself, and that they didn't have to be in conflict with one another. But I think if you had asked me that like right after publishing Homegoing, I probably wouldn't have known what to say. So yes, I do think that the books changed me. I'm just not always sure I know how. Yeah. And for the last question, I just looked it up. It's called Heroine, with like the E in apostrophes. So like a hero woman with the E in apostrophes. Heroine.
Thank you, Yaa.
Mm-hmm.
Professor Rosemary Roberts, dance professor, thank you so much for this conversation. It feels like food for our souls.
Mm-hmm.
I'm turning in, she's tuning in from Mystic. Like Dean McKnight, she loved Homegoing, and it was so great. I'm glad you just talked about that in your process, and can't wait to read Transcendent Kingdom. She's giving me a shout out. Thank you, Rosemary. So she says, yeah, in your comments, you made a distinction between race and racism. These often get conflated. Would you say more about this distinction, particularly from the point of view of your book chapters?
Yeah, well, I think of racism as the kind of system that we operate within. Race itself, people say this, and I don't know if it's often like internalized or accepted, but race is a social construct. There is no like biological definition of race. There are just people who are who have more melanin than other people. So racism is the system that was created in order to delineate who gets the majority of the wealth or the opportunities or the what have you, because of race. So race is like a title, and racism is a system.
Got it. Thank you. We lost your screen, Yaa.
Oh.
Who knows what's going on in our virtual worlds here. We can hear you clearly, so
Okay.
I'll just continue.
Okay.
Oh, she said you're back.
I'm back. Okay, good.
So are you working on another book? What's next? From Annie Philbrick.
This is the $1 million question. And I'm always like too superstitious to answer this question.
Yeah.
So I will say that I'm at a place right now where I'm thinking a lot about something, but it's too new for me to know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Cassandra's mentioning that this is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. I wonder, does the mother continue living in her bed throughout the book, or does she recover or grow stronger? Oh, that's revealed. It's revealed, but I'll let Yaa answer
that. It is revealed in the novel, and I don't want to give it away because I think that one would be a spoiler. But what I will say is that there's a moment toward the end of the novel where, after much kind of strife between these two women who have, for most of Gifty's life, all of Gifty's life and much of the mother's life, they are two women who haven't really been able to understand each other. Gifty is kind of consumed with worry about her mother. There's a moment toward the end of the novel where her mother kind of takes her head in her hands and says, you don't have to worry about me. God is with me wherever I go. So I'll leave it at that, but there is resolution at the end.
Okay, I think that's all of our questions from the audience. I see Anastasia coming back in, so I'll let her take it away.
Thank you, Shani. Oh, you're muted, Anastasia.
Here I am. I just wanted to say thank you to both of you for this really incredible conversation. And thank you so much to our audience for tuning in today. It was really great. I think we had a lot of very poignant questions and sort of thoughts throughout the conversation, which is really fabulous. And so Shani, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to read the book and come up with these questions and continue to move the discussion along. And Yaa, thank you for joining our our virtual event space here. It was really a pleasure to have you. And with that, we're gonna wrap up today. And for those of you who are tuning in, we host a number of virtual events pretty much every week. We actually have a light week this week, in part due to this big event. And then tomorrow night, Connecticut College is the host for the Southeastern Connecticut One Book One region, of which you probably remember me mentioning earlier tonight, or this afternoon, that Yaa is a alumna of. So tomorrow night at 7 p.m. is Joy Harjo, and she'll be talking about Crazy Brave, and you can find out more information about that on our website. And thank you both so much. And with that, we will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yaa. Thank you, audience.
Thank you, guys.